Hello, it is Jay. I am checking in with the first two parts, 65% of Unreconciled Family, Truth, and Indigenous Resistance by Jesse Wente, a mixture of memoir and and sort of political essay on the state of Indigenous, you know, truth, family, and Indigenous resistance in Canada, all seen through the lens of Jesse Wente, a Canadian Ojibwe broadcaster. I know him as a film critic, though he was a film critic in up until like the late 90s, when from my perspective he disappeared because he then went into sort of film. What do you call him? He was like a film programmer, and then kind of running the big independent theater in big institution of TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival. Their big theater in Toronto. So for a guy out here in for a guy in Victoria in BC, he functionally disappeared. I didn't see him again unless he popped up as a film critic or the odd interview, or I think later on, as he says, he starts talking about a lot of cultural appropriation talk, discussion that happened in Canada about exactly who it was appropriate to be telling stories, and definitely went through that period of a good kind of questioning of there'd been a long history of white people being the ones who would tell Indigenous stories, and surprise, surprise, white people listening only to other white people tell Indigenous stories, shutting Indigenous people's voices out, their perspectives, to further the kind of Canadian lying to ourselves about how wonderful we are and how much we're so much better, and embraced Indigenous people and haven't completely fucked them over historically all the way up to the present day, and are continuing to do it all the time, expecting them to be thanking us for our fuckery. So yeah, this is very much a story that Jesse Wente tells about his family, white father coming from the States, and a Ojibwe mother who, very much a part of the Canadian assimilation thing, was made to feel, and functionally pushed into feeling like if she wanted to get ahead, she needed to be as least native as possible, and kind of moving away from the reservation, working at a company with his father, both of them eventually becoming executives at that thing. Him realizing the first time that he was an Indian, he was native when made to feel an Indian, as the kind of cliche Indian. When the opposing team at a baseball game started doing a war whoop, they all in unison did a war whoop at him to jeer him, versus the dirty, all the kind of usual jeering that happens that's not racially motivated at baseball games. So there's that. There's kind of discrimination he had in school. He had viral meningitis, and basically a teacher viewing him as a nuisance. This is public school, but a nuisance. And he's getting all A's, yet he doesn't know how to read. It's like, what the fuck? So the parents, being in a very lucky position, having their parents having a lot of money, were able to foot the bill to send him and his sister's sister to very expensive private school. And by expensive private school, he says, like, one of his graduating fellows got a brewery, the entire brewery, as a graduation present, which if you know that part of the country, you can probably guess what family has got a lot of breweries to toss around to offspring. Yeah, yeah. So doing that, getting into the CBC, becoming a film critic, his love of cinema, his and kind of realizing, wow, um, coming in contact with indigenous filmmakers and thinking like, holy crap, how great this is as a particular expression of his, of culture, of his history, working his way through that. And then, yeah, and working in the CBC and having the experience of being an intern and getting dumped in with the whole lead to lead the story on the Truth and Reconciliation report that comes out, because yes, we're going to make a token, which was like he worked his ass off, but it was like, yeah, they didn't put a experienced reporter on that story because it wasn't viewed as that experience that is important. And I mean, the unacknowledged truth of all these fucking royal commissions, wonderful, beautifully printed out, and they get the politicians praise them, and then they get treasure carefully placed onto a shelf and ignored, and not actually followed through on. Just wonderful, wonderful. I always think of Thomas King's and his Dead Dog Cafe, where at the end of an episode, they would have one of the characters sit down by the fire and read another section of the Truth and Reconciliation, and they'd say like, "Wow, isn't that just so pretty?" The thing being like pretty, and nobody's ever actually done anything with it. It's like, fuck's sake. And so yeah, there's that. And now we're on to him in the at the Toronto International Film Festival, and he says like, I'd started out well, I worked my ass off, but as it went along, it became more and more. I was the token Native person there to sign off on their film choices, forced to watch 3 films, all about native stories, none of them told made by native peoples in the decision making in things. 2 of them deeply racist, and one just kind of bland, but made by somebody who a white filmmaker who just didn't particularly connect with the material. And he gave his feedback and was completely ignored. They took the 2 racist ones, and the bland one, they said, nope, we didn't do it. And it apparently gotten back to those filmmakers that was like, oh, it's because of what Jesse said that we didn't take it, which was like, it's like, well, if you're going to take the 2 racist ones, why not actually take the one that's just sort of bland and blah, and it's Canadian as well, which, I mean, bland and blah sums up a lot of well, that's being unfair, but a lot of times we seem to have the blandification effect in a lot of much film, but maybe you could say that about a lot of film. And so he was like, fuck this, and he left. So yeah, that's where I'm up to so far. It's great to get, it's sort of, in some ways, it's the same story. I've heard this again and again. He references Thomas King, Inconvenient Indian in this thing, which is like, wow, yeah, that has got to be the sharpest, most biting, most savage of the books that I've read, limited books I've read. But I've also, I think about the other books I've read. This is like, oh, I'm developing a whole library. A lot of them are saying sort of similar stuff, but it's everyone's from a different perspective. Him being from somebody who is like, in some ways, got a lot of privileges, and he says like, you know what? And he addresses that in the book. It's like, people will say, oh, well, you're not Native enough because you got all these privileges. You got a private school education that, when it came to university, it's like, well, should I actually take money to go to university? And he said, fuck. And his mother's like, yes, you goddamn will, because they've taken so much from your family, they can give back to you. However, her proviso was, yes, you're going to take the money, but there's going to come a time when you will need to turn back to your people and give back to them as a result of all the stuff that you're given. So there's definitely that sense of purpose that you can see driving Wente. In addition to the whole thing of becoming, he says, like, I was, he was the first, maybe still the only working indigenous movie critic, at least for when he was doing it. In a while, there's a lot of things. He was the very first, and it's like there's always that pressure of, like, if you fuck up, maybe you'll be the last, because they'll just assume you are the representative of your people, and if you can't do it, well, then none of you can, which is deeply bullshitty, but also stuff like, yeah, you have to be the best. You have to be the best, and it's more riding on it than just your own personal your own personal success. So yeah, 2/3 through, and it's a short book. It's like just 7 hours long, read by Jesse Wente, a voice that I'm very familiar from his work on the radio, doing movie reviews and stuff like that. It's one of those things of, like, I think I wasn't, because I was listening to him on the radio, I wasn't actually aware that he was native. He was the movie critic, and that's all I knew him as. And I think at some point I was like, oh, why is he working on indigenous, working for an indigenous organization or heading it up? It's like, oh, it's because he's indigenous. So, because, he was a movie critic, and I didn't probably, you'd catch him here and there on the, talking about whatever movie happened to be coming up at the time. So yeah. All right, I will leave it there. I've been Jay. More videos later.